Hello everybody, this is Mr. Flamo and welcome to Digital Learning Day. We are going to look at the political institutions of China here. Now before we do anything, I want to make sure you all have actually read Political Institutions Part 2. It's only 10 minutes long. If you haven't, stop the video right now and go and read it or listen to it or whatever way you normally consume that stuff. So once you finish with that, then we can go forward. So I'm going to actually pause for 5 seconds to give you time to actually hit the pause on this video and then maybe go read it. Okay, I didn't wait 5 seconds, but let's get started here. Okay, so we are going to look at political institutions here of China. And you see in front of you on the screen here, and you may have moved over from Canvas, this same document, an outline of the various political institutions in China. There's actually what are called, there's actually 3 institutions here, okay? There's the military, which I'm going to zoom in here so you can see that, the military. There's the Chinese Communist Party, and there's government institutions. Now, we're going to start by looking at the most important of these. These are actually parallel institutions. You see this? The military, the Communist Party, and government institutions all exist. They all interact with one another. Actually, the Communist Party controls all the others. But understanding how the 3 are distinct and how they're organized differently is important to understanding how the government of China functions. So first off, let's look at the first and most powerful institution, and that is the Chinese Communist Party here. And let's start at the very top. You have read about an institution called the Politburo. The Politburo consists of 25 individuals. The Politburo actually stands for Political Bureau. It's a name of the institution in the Soviet Union that China just kind of borrowed. Now, the Politburo runs the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. It is led by a guy named the General Secretary, and he heads a group called the Standing Committee. So, in the Political Bureau, or the Politburo, there are 25 individuals. 7 of those individuals form the Standing Committee. One of those individuals in the Standing Committee runs the whole deal, and he's called the General Secretary. So the Politburo is really the power base of the Communist Party. This is where everything happens. Now, underneath the Politburo, there is a group called the Central Committee. The Central Committee consists of about 376 individuals. These are also top political leaders. These are individuals who have a lot of power, a lot of influence on the Communist Party's overall policies. Beneath that, you have this organization called the National Party Congress. The National Party Congress is very, very big. It consists of, at least right now, 2,268 individuals. Now, the National Party Congress only meets once every 5 years. They met most recently in 2013. They'll meet again in 2018. And they meet just for a couple weeks. And while officially the National Party Congress is supposed to be a group of all these top communist leaders, and they get together and they decide policy, in reality, they gather once every 5 years to have presented to them the top leadership. That is, the individuals who are going to make up the Politburo and the Standing Committee of the Politburo and the General Secretary. Now, these individuals right up here in the Politburo, the ones we'd already talked about, the General Secretary, the Standing Committee, and all the members of the Politburo, they serve 5-year terms. So, when the National Party Congress meets every 5 years, they find out who is going to be members of the Politburo. Now, beneath the National Party Congress, you have what are called local party congresses. Now, these are congresses that meet far more often than once every 5 years. These are gatherings of top political communist leaders who get together and talk about a variety of policy issues that relates to their specific local area, be it a province or a city or things like that. And beneath that, you have these things called party branches. And this is kind of a weird thing, but it's important to understand. We've talked about how the Communist Party influences pretty much all aspects of life in China. So party branches are basically parts of the Communist Party, organizations of the Communist Party that reach into almost every facet of life. So schools, companies, social organizations, pretty much you name it in China, it has a party branch. In other words, it has a few communist members who represent the party at that organization, that school, that company, that social organization, or whatever. All right, so There you have it. That is the Chinese Communist Party, the basic structure of the Chinese Communist Party. Now, just so when we go forward in the chart, you recognize the Chinese Communist Party is the central institution in China. It controls the government institutions, it controls the military. I know if you did your reading, you know that there's parties other than the Chinese Communist Party, but the Chinese Communist Party basically controls those other parties. The Chinese Communist Party controls pretty much every aspect of life in China, including the actual government institutions of the People's Republic of China. So let's zoom in over here on the government institutions, and you see that the government institutions are broken up just like they are in the United States or Great Britain or even Russia, between an executive branch whose job it is to execute laws, to carry out policy, the legislative branch whose job it is to create laws, and the judicial branch, of course, which oversees the judicial system or the court system. So let's first look at the executive branch. Now, if you look at this little chart here, my beautiful chart, you see that the executive branch is kind of broken down between the national level and the local level. At the top of the national level is the individual who is in charge of the executive branch, and that is the president. Now, according to the Chinese Constitution, the president is really just kind of a figurehead. But in reality, in practice, the president basically runs the executive branch. Now, the president, according to the Chinese Constitution, is picked by the National People's Congress. But in reality, the president is actually picked by the Chinese Communist Party. He's actually picked through a complex series of very opaque negotiations amongst the Politburo, the Central Committee, the Standing Committee, kind of the top part of the Chinese Communist Party. Okay, so the president oversees the executive branch. The president then appoints someone called the prime minister or the premier. And the prime minister or premier oversees this group called the State Council. The easiest way to understand the State Council is to think of the British cabinet. That is Prime Minister Theresa May and her cabinet. So the State Council is full of a bunch of ministers whose job it is to implement policy. So the president oversees the whole process, the president appoints a prime minister, the prime minister is the official head of government, and he, because it's always a he here, basically appoints all of the ministers that make up the State Council. Now, underneath that on the chart, you see this thing that says central government organizations. That just refers to all of the organizations at the national level whose job it is to carry out policy. And then below that, you see something called the local part of the executive branch, and it says local people's governments. There's a lot of local governments throughout China. China's a huge place, tons of provinces, lots and lots of municipalities or cities. So each one of those has its own little executive branch underneath the executive branch of the national government, but nevertheless they have these local governments whose job it is to carry out local policy. Now, China, of course, also has a legislative branch, and the big body within the legislative branch is a body known as the National People's Congress. This is a massive group of individuals who come together once every year for 2 weeks in March. And while the Chinese Constitution says that this is where most of the power in China is supposed to lay, in reality, the National People's Congress that meets for 2 weeks once every year just serves as kind of a rubber stamp Congress. That is, they gather once a year to approve all of the laws that have been created by the president and the premier. You also have, beneath that, the local People's Congress. Now, this is not just one level. There's local People's Congresses in the various, at the provincial level, at the city level, at county level. So the local People's Congress, even though it's marked in this chart as being kind of like one thing, there's congresses all around the country. And it's their job to create policy for local governments. So in China, the legislative branch is to be considered much, much weaker than the executive branch. Now, an even weaker branch is called the judicial branch. The highest court in the land in China is called the Supreme People's Court. The Supreme People's Court does not have the power of judicial review. Though China does indeed have a constitution, the Supreme People's Court does not have the power to decide whether or not a law passed is constitutional. The last thing you want to know about the government institutions, you see it's at the very bottom under kind of the local bracket, is something called village assemblies. So I mentioned the legislative branch and the local People's Congress and the National People's Congress, and you may have this idea that those are bodies where people are chosen through a democratic process, which is not the case at all. Those are individuals who are chosen to be part of those congresses by the Communist Party. The only place that actually has real competitive elections are at the very local level through these village assemblies. So there's thousands of small little villages throughout China, and those small little villages are relatively autonomous. They have free elections where they can vote for their own local representatives to actually serve in these village assemblies and run the day-to-day life of the government. Now, all that is really still overseen by the Communist Party, but still, they actually can vote for those individuals who are going to be part of the village assemblies. So we've looked now at the organization and structure of the Chinese Communist Party and the organization and structure of the government institutions. The last thing here is the military. Now, the military is overseen by a body called the Central Military Commission, the CMC, which is a body composed of 11 individuals. 10 individuals from the military and 1 civilian. The civilian runs the CMC. The civilian serves as the chair of the Central Military Commission. Now, that individual actually, therefore, is the commander-in-chief of the military. Underneath the Central Military Commission, of course, is the People's Liberation Army. And the People's Liberation Army is 2.3 million people strong. There's also a bunch of reserves and militias and things like that. But it's a very, very huge organization. Now, so far you may have the impression that the Chinese Communist Party, the government institutions, and the military are all kind of separate entities within the People's Republic of China, but that's not quite true. The Chinese Communist Party controls all 3 of those things. Obviously, it controls the Communist Party, but it also controls the government institutions, and it controls the military. So the Politburo, or more specifically the Standing Committee of the Politburo, they choose the top leadership in all the government institutions, and they choose the top leadership in the military. So, for example, the General Secretary of the Communist Party is a guy named Xi Jinping. Now, he runs the Standing Committee, and the Standing Committee, of course, is in charge of the Politburo, and the Politburo is in charge of the entire Communist Party. So you can think of Xi Jinping as the individual who is in control of the entire Chinese Communist Party. Now, the General Secretary of the Communist Party is also the same individual who serves as president of the People's Republic of China. So in the executive branch, the president is also Xi Jinping. The prime minister that he picks, this guy named Li Keqiang now, he also serves on the standing committee of the Politburo. So you see, there's no real separation between the two. And Xi Jinping also serves as chair of the Central Military Commission. So he is the commander-in-chief of the military. So the top leadership of the Chinese Communist Party also serves as the top leadership of the government institutions and the military. Now, some quick specifics here. The president of the executive branch is chosen by the National People's Congress to serve a 5-year term. However, they are limited to 2 5-year terms, and there's never really any possibility that they won't serve a second term. So for all intents and purposes, the president of the government serves a 10-year term. Usually, he appoints the same prime minister for both of those terms. Now, he is also, Xi Jinping, is also the General Secretary of the Politburo, and therefore the General Secretary of the Communist Party, during that same time period, roughly, the same 10-year period. And he's also the chair of the Central Military Commission for that same 10-year period. Now, sometimes there's some overlap there, where the General Secretary of the Communist Party is appointed before, the new one is appointed before he is officially made president of the government. But basically, you have the General Secretary of the Communist Party, the president, and the chair of the Central Military Commission, who are the same person and who all serve basically that 10-year time period. So there we go. Those are the institutions of government in the People's Republic of China. I hope that helps a little bit. You may just want to stare at this chart maybe for a long period of time until it sinks into your brain. Make sure you make note of any questions you happen to have, and we can answer those in my 3rd and 4th period on Monday and my 7th period on Tuesday. Quick reminder, I know you know this, but we're going to have our China Unit Terms quiz on Monday or Tuesday, depending upon what day you have this class next, so be prepared.